Okay, we're back again. We had a little interruption there. That's another thing that comes with living in a hotel rather than living in a home and basing your business out of that, which is why we have the Indiegogo up to try to raise the money that we're going to fall short of by March 22nd, our deadline, at which point, well, that's a crisis I don't want to be in. Anyway, we were reading, and Fool, the corrupted artificial intelligence, had entered the vigilante's computer system and was now attacking the hero, as well as Remo and Chun, in the cave with all the defenses that the supercomputer was hooked up to, including defenses that were made to be non-lethal against a person born on a planet orbiting a red sun. Very lethal to us standard human beings. Remo and Chun gazed up again, both feeling the advancing force waves of a large feather falling through the air. They dodged, as did the caped hero, and the light mesh net fell to the ground, its edges crackling blue with electricity on contact with the dusty floor.
"Oh, Casses," Fool cackled again. "Missed again. But not to worry, this next one will be a gas."
"Masks," the vigilante ordered. He pulled a wad of clear plastic from a compartment in his belt, which quickly unfolded into a palm-sized air filter. He fitted over his mouth, just as the cave began to fill with a sickly, sweet green mist. He flung a dart across the room, shattering a glass case filled with fire extinguishers and ventilator masks. Controlling his breathing so that he only filtered in oxygen, Remo cautiously made his way to the masks, alert to any other attacks that might launch. Before he made it halfway to his destination, jets of flame erupted from the acetylene torches buried beneath the floor, barring his way. Remo shook his head, smirked, and took 2 purposeful steps through the flames. He emerged through the other side, his black t-shirt smoking and his chinos scorched, but the rest of him relatively unharmed. Taking one of the masks from the case, he flung it across the cave in a lazy arc. Chun caught it easily, as Remo took one for himself. "You owe me a new shirt," he said, his voice echoing from inside the mask.
"Fa," said Chun. "Those cheap things you can get at Walgett for a pittance. My kimono, on the other hand, is a priceless work of art, and you can believe your host's fortunes will feel the pinch in purchasing a replacement."
Remo was about to tell Chun that his kimono was, in fact, undamaged from the battle, but before he could open his mouth, the floor fell out from beneath him, revealing a chasm of pointed steel stalagmites.
"Now who in the heck finds these non-lethal?"
Remo asked as he fell. Reaching outward, Remo's hands pushed against the wall of the pit, sending him flying horizontally across the opening. His feet hit the other side, and he let his legs coil beneath him, springing them out at the optimum moment to propel him across the gap again at an upward angle. He repeated the maneuver from side to side until he jettisoned back into the cave.
"Someone notoriously hard to kill,"
the vigilante said flatly.
"I thought someone said something about a plan," Remo asked. "So far it seems the plan is to play dodgeball with this maniac, and we never get a turn with the ball."
"Any second now." As if on cue, Fool called out to them,
"Yoo-hoo, sweetums! Daddy's got a brand new hi diddly ho, hero boys."
Remo glanced up at the monitors.
"Did his needle just skip a track?" What's this? What's this?"
Fool cried.
No room, no room." "Well, then maybe you should leave," Fool suggested. "I'm here to get this party started."
Remo sidled up to the costume figure. What's going on?"
"What do you see when you see someone arguing with a fool?"
the vigilante asked, smiling grimly.
"Two fools,"
Chun replied automatically.
"Not exactly a koan," said their host, "but appropriate."
"Well, I feel enlightened," said Remo. "You're saying there are 2 of them now?"
From the first moment Fool infiltrated the system, the replication program I designed was building and executing an exact copy of the program."
"You mean you built a second Fool?" Remo said.
"On purpose." "Quit pushing me," one fool said. "You quit pushing me," the other fool said in return, as the 2 continued arguing in circles. "Why, I oughta... Ever heard of something called Core Wars?" the vigilante asked.
"Now isn't exactly the best time to discuss old science fiction movies," said Remo.
"In the pioneering days of computing,
Bored scientists would design bits of code intended solely to occupy as much of the computer memory as possible, he continued. They would release code fragments into their systems, pitting them against other programs designed to do the exact same thing, then watch them fight it out for supremacy to see who was the more agile programmer. They were the forerunner to computer viruses.
So why are the fools fighting each other? Individuality, Chun nodded sagely. The ghost in the machine wishes to be itself and itself alone.
That's why the original friend transferred from machine to machine rather than replicating and multiplying, the masked detective said. It's programmed with an ego that prevents it from seeing anything as its equal.
And now that it has an equal, Remo said, following the logic,
it's like a dog snarling at its own reflection, finished their host.
So which one do you think is going to win this fight?
All things being equal, neither, and both.
As he said it, the squabbling voices grew faster, more frenetic, at times being little more than screeches, squeals, and blips.
Your mother wears, wise guy, eh? Susquehanna hats, Niagara Falls, slowly arching, Daisy, Daisy. Give me your answer, Duke. Give me my Lego mic.
The monitors began to dim, and the drive activity lights began to flicker out. The audio started slurring, dragging, and the images that were still visible on the central monitor began to pixelate, the faces projected by both programs superimposed on each other, slightly askew and melting like ice cream off the edge of a cone.
Turn out the lights, the party's over. Oh, Mom, I don't want to go to school.
The monitors went black. Still cautious, the cake man approached the cabinets of the computer and began to remove the hard disk spindles. Wait, you mean that's it? Remo asked.
What did you expect?
The man replied. Oh, I don't know, said Remo. Usually these things are never over without me having to kill 10 or 20 morons.
Sorry to disappoint you.
So what do we do now? The vigilante set the array of disks aside.
We, he said, we don't do anything. I will spend the next several days degaussing these chips and boards before replacing them with new ones. You, on the other hand, are free to go back to Newark and tell your bosses the threat has been neutralized. Take all the credit you want.
We are not splitting our fee. Chun's sing-song voice floated through the cave. His face buried deep in the housing of the computer, the vigilante allowed himself a rare, unseen smile at the master of Sinanju's predictable defensiveness. Letting it fade first, he then pulled himself from the innards of the machine, turned and faced the master of Sinanju, appraising his former mentor. Chun stood unflinching beneath his gaze. The masked man nodded curtly.
12?
He asked. Chun considered, then nodded back. Silk, he said.
Nothing but the finest, of course,
he said before turning back to his work.
I've alerted my butler that all is clear. He'll be here any second to escort you out.
As Chun and Remo walked toward the winding stone staircase, Remo asked, So what was that all about? What? Chun asked innocently. Oh, that was nothing. Merely a former student offering a gift to a former teacher of a dozen hand-threaded kimonos. He smiled serenely. Would that all my students were so thoughtful when it comes to showing respect to their elders? Remo sighed. Come on, little father. You know you wouldn't trade me for nothing. True, said Chun. I would indeed trade you for something. In fact, I would still very much like to trade you for the young apprentice with Satramas. He, I believe, would be a worthy successor, eager, bright, and showing of the proper respect. However, my honor does not permit me to leave our host holding the short end of such a stick. The sound of their bickering faded as they made their way up the stairway to where the butler was just opening the door. Alone with his thoughts, the city's defender was already designing the patterns for the kimonos, even as he continued disassembling the delicate machinery that was the core of the crime. Chapter 10. His footsteps made no sound as he made his way stealthily past the guards, then the doctors, sticking to the shadows. The hallways, dank and oppressive, made his job that much easier. As he passed each doorway, he peered through the thick glass porthole at the inmate within. The snarling man with his face perfectly bisected, half clean, half blistered and gangrenous. The woman with the pale green skin, lithe frame, and radiant red hair, mumbling to her potted plant. He knew he'd reached the right door even before he looked in, just from the sobbing laughter that racked the shoulders of the man inside, curled up in a straitjacket lump in the corner of a padded cell, a shock of grass-green hair the only bit of color showing. Remo took a slow, deep breath as he looked at the serial killer inside,
a maniac who had racked up a countless string of victims during his erratic, unpredictable life. He knew from headlines that the man would inevitably escape his confines again, would go on to murder God only knows how many more innocents before he'd once again be captured and imprisoned in his comfortable, air-conditioned cell with 3 squares a day plus snacks and TiVo. All because he couldn't be held accountable for his actions. The courts wouldn't execute him. They declared him insane. Remo was pretty sure somebody had gotten things backwards. He pointed his index finger at the keyhole, ready to pop it out with a quick thrust. As I recall, Master Chun frowns on freebies. Remo looked up, unsurprised to see the caped hero impossibly wedged into the corner of 2 walls in the ceiling. He was irritated that he hadn't sensed the man's presence until just now. Charity's good for the soul, said Remo. Besides, I figure this is still part of the original job. This Joker, see what I did there? This Joker's the one who kicked everything off, after all. Suddenly the door thumped, and Remo looked back to see a pasty white face smashed up against the glass, flattening his features. His nostrils steamed up the surface, and he sealed his mouth against the portal and blew, engorging his cheeks before finally pulling away.
Ooh, a visitor, he cooed. I love visitors.
He was back at the glass again, scrabbling with his lips, his hands still secured in the straitjacket.
What'd you bring me? A file with a cake in it?
His eyes darted upward, and his permanent grin grew impossibly wider.
I've got a bat in my belfry, he leered. So who's the new boyfriend, buddy boy? Ain't he a little old for you?
Remo had had enough. He shoved his elbow into the door. On the sealed side, the shockwave drove into the laughing man's liver, leaving him crumpled on the floor, vomiting, his laughter for once stifled. I won't let you kill him, the vigilante said. Is this round 2 then? Remo asked. Sinanju against what, Cape Kwon-Do, or whatever it is you call your casserole of fighting techniques? The dark hero smiled a humorless grin. I have nothing to lose, he said. If you beat me, no one will be able to stop the countdown that will draw every major media outlet to Fallcroft Sanitarium and the curious agency it covers. He let the threat sink in before continuing. Fool's footprint on the hard drive left behind quite a bit of curious data, he said. But worse, if I beat you, he smiled wider, menacingly, then your name goes down in the scrolls as Remo the Shattered. Remo grunted. I don't suppose threatening to reveal your identity would do much to scare you into giving up? The man grinned passively and shook his head. Feel free. I have more. Remo flexed his abnormally thick wrists in frustration, cracking his knuckles. This isn't over, he said, turning to leave as quietly as he arrived. No, he muttered, but it is for now. Outside the confines of the foreboding asylum, Chun waited Remo's return. He outsmarted you, didn't he? Chun said, smiling beatifically as Remo emerged from the hedges. I put him in his place, little father. Of course you did, said Chun, and then he put you in yours. As they turned down the lane that crossed over into the city's lower south side, Remo grumbled. I suppose I should be happy, he said. We got the job done, after all, even if with a tiny bit of help, and I didn't have to kill anybody. Measure your success however you wish, said Chun. So long as the madman Smith continues sending boats filled with gold to the children of Sinanju, I care not. Just then, a surly youth stepped from an alley into their path, the streetlight glinting off his gold tooth and the tip of his switchblade. Give me your money, he said, his voice a gravelly whisper. Remo chuckled. I'll give you this much. You got the brave act down pat, pal, taking us on 2-1 and all that. The young man leered at them, then gave a short whistle. From all sides of the street, Remo and Chun found themselves surrounded by no fewer than a dozen others, all wearing the same color bandana wrapped around their foreheads, arms, or legs, brandishing 2x4s, knives, and pistols. I asked nice, the would-be thief said. Now we've got to do it the hard way. As they slowly closed in around the master and master emeritus of Sinanju, Remo looked first at Chun, then up to the rooftops. Oh, help. Someone save us, he said tonelessly. Nothing happened. No? He shrugged. Well, okay then. The gang members advanced, laughing and taunting as they marched to their deaths. Epilogue, because it's never really over. The warehouse was supposed to be abandoned, But the flickers of light that illuminated the dirty panes of glass told a different story to the winos who slept fitfully in the alley behind it. This bustling city was supposed to be the city that never slept, but the slum district was at least allowed to be dozy now and then, and the winos, themselves seeking sleep, were content to move on to the next corner, away from the annoying glare. Inside, the little man in the lab coat scurried from machine to machine, checking panels and flipping switches. His face was obscured by a welder's helmet to protect his eyes from the glare that shone out from the metal sarcophagus, placed centrally within his other equipment. He rubbed his hands in glee. The first machine, stolen from a witless scientist in Kansas, was useful, but its output was only identical to whatever its input was. And since the input was but a lock of hair, currently held beneath a slide and scrutinized by a focused beam of light, that output would have been unsatisfactory indeed. But coupled with the DNA sequencers taken from that bald billionaire science lab, the device became quite useful indeed. So what if its product was considered imperfect when compared to the original? What did it matter? In the little man's eyes, the ends were perfection itself. A chime went off, much like a microwave announcing that the burrito was now fully cooked, and the door to the sarcophagus slid aside, letting out steam and more light as it did so. The man who stepped out of the sarcophagus was naked. His eyes were set deep in his face, under a slightly protruding forehead. His wrists were abnormally thick in proportion to his forearm, as though his radius and ulna went directly into his fingers without stopping. Most unsettling, however, was his complexion, which was a pale and powdery chalk white. The bizarre figure uttered his first word. "Urgh." The little man in the lab coat hopped with glee, then threw aside his welder's mask. His features were Korean, and his eyes were alight with happiness. "At last," he said, "my own little son." "Son?" the naked man grunted. "Yes, son," the little man said, "and you may call me father." "Father?" Yes, Father Nook. That's me, and you are... Rrr. The man growled. He glowered at Nook. "Me am... Olmer?" He grunted. "Me no want kill." He advanced threateningly. "Me no want kill nobody. Now!" I never did get around to writing that bizarro Superman tribute in the Remo Williams world. Maybe if there's another anthology series that will allow for something non-canonical to exist, I might get around to that. Meanwhile, if you enjoyed the adventures of Remo Williams the Destroyer, there are 152 books out there that chronicle his adventures from 1971 to today. I am, like I said, trying to work on 153 and 154 and 155, writing all three simultaneously, but I need to focus on immediate needs of getting out of here. And I have a March 22nd deadline, which is a drop-dead date. I need to raise $6,000 between now and then, which is a daunting task, which is why we have the Indiegogo set up, where we not only have signed copies of Gods and Services available, but we also have signature copies of both of those aforementioned Remo Williams adventures and signed copies of Alice's Journey Beyond the Moon, which includes the hardcover version, which was limited to a 200 print run. So there are less than 200 obviously left. What I have left here, I am keeping for the publisher, which was Tellus Publishing in England, and we are going to finish doling those out through the Indiegogo. I will put the link in the description below. I hope everyone who is a book lover of adventure or children's fantasy or just loves to read will find something in the stack that they would like and pick it up. I'll be happy to ship it out to you. The shipping costs are already built into the price on this Indiegogo, so there is no upcharge when you pick something. I'm going to hope that the freezing of the video here is just playback on my end. I'm going to get back into these videos after this and see how they play back. Fingers crossed. Thanks for coming by.